The daughter complained about the teacher to her father until the next day he went to school by surprise when he opened the door. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick silence lingering in the air as Anna slammed her backpack on the kitchen table. She stood there for a moment, her face flushed with frustration, before collapsing into a chair. Her father, Jack, looked up from his newspaper, concern etched on his face. "Rough day?" he asked gently, folding the paper and setting it aside. Anna nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "It's Mr. Thompson, Dad. He's just so unfair." Her voice wavered as she spoke, the words tumbling out in a rush. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me what happened," he said, his tone calm and encouraging. Anna took a deep breath, her hands clenching and unclenching on the table. "It's not just one thing. It's everything. He always singles me out, no matter what I do. Today, I answered a question in class, and he said I was wrong even though I was right. Then he gave me detention for talking, but I wasn't even talking. It's like he has it out for me." Jack's brow furrowed as he listened, his concern growing with each word. He knew his daughter well enough to recognize when something was genuinely troubling her. "Have you talked to him about this? Maybe there's a misunderstanding," he suggested. Anna shook her head vehemently. "No, Dad, he won't listen. He never listens. He makes me feel like I'm not good enough, like I'm always in the wrong. And it's not just me. Other kids have noticed it too." Jack felt a pang of anger mixed with helplessness. He wanted to protect his daughter, to make things right for her, but he knew that marching into the school with guns blazing might not be the best approach. "All right," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I hear you, Anna. This sounds serious. I'll talk to him, but let's think about the best way to approach this. We don't want to make things worse." Anna looked at her father, hope mingling with doubt in her eyes. "You really think you can help?" Jack reached across the table and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I promise I'll do everything I can. We'll figure this out together." That night, after Anna had gone to bed, Jack sat in the living room, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the image of his daughter's distraught face. He knew he needed to get to the bottom of this, to understand what was really going on in that classroom. He decided that he would visit the school the next day, unannounced, to see for himself what was happening. The next morning, Jack was up early, sipping his coffee and preparing for the day ahead. Anna came down the stairs, looking a little more hopeful than the night before. "Morning, Dad," she said, offering him a small smile. "Morning, sweetie," Jack replied. "I'm going to the school today. I'll talk to Mr. Thompson and see what's going on. Try not to worry, okay?" Anna nodded, her expression a mix of anxiety and relief. "Okay. Thanks, Dad." As Anna left for school, Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. He spent the next hour researching school policies, familiarizing himself with the rights of students and parents. He even looked up Mr. Thompson online, hoping to gain some insight into the man who had caused his daughter so much distress. When he felt prepared, Jack headed to the school. He parked the car and walked briskly toward the main entrance, his mind focused on the task at hand. Inside, the school was bustling with activity, students hurrying to their classes and teachers preparing for the day. Jack approached the front desk, where a friendly-looking receptionist greeted him. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," Jack replied. "I'm Jack Harrison, Anna Harrison's father. I'd like to speak with Mr. Thompson. Is he available?" The receptionist checked her schedule, then nodded. "He should be in his classroom now. Do you know where that is?" Jack nodded. "Yes, thank you." He made his way through the halls, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. When he reached Mr. Thompson's classroom, he paused outside the door, taking a deep breath before knocking. He heard the murmur of voices inside, followed by a moment of silence, and then the door opened. Mr. Thompson stood there, a look of mild surprise on his face. Mr. Harrison, isn't it? Anna's father? Yes, Jack said, trying to keep his tone neutral. I was hoping to speak with you about Anna. Mr. Thompson nodded, stepping aside to let Jack in. Of course. Come in. The classroom was filled with students, all eyes turning toward Jack as he entered. Mr. Thompson addressed the class. Continue with your assignment, everyone. This will just take a few minutes. Jack glanced around the room, noting the curious stares of the students. He followed Mr. Thompson to a corner of the classroom, where they could speak without being overheard. I'm here because Anna has been very upset lately, Jack began, trying to keep his voice steady. She feels that she's being treated unfairly in your class. Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. I see. And what exactly has she told you? Jack recounted Anna's complaints, watching Mr. Thompson's reaction closely. The teacher listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Jack finished, Mr. Thompson sighed. I understand your concerns, Mr. Harrison. But I assure you, I treat all my students fairly. Anna might feel singled out, but I hold all my students to the same standards. Jack felt a surge of frustration. But why does she feel this way? She's not the only one who's noticed it. Mr. Thompson hesitated, then nodded. Look, I admit I've been stricter with Anna lately. But it's because I see potential in her. She's bright, and I want to push her to do her best. Sometimes that means being tough. Jack frowned. Being tough is one thing, but making her feel like she's always in the wrong? That's not helping her. It's making her miserable. Mr. Thompson looked away for a moment, then back at Jack. I hadn't realized she felt that way. I'll make an effort to be more mindful of my approach. I don't want any of my students to feel like they can't succeed. Jack nodded, feeling a bit of the tension ease. That's all I'm asking for. Just give her a fair chance. Mr. Thompson extended his hand. I will. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Jack shook his hand, feeling a sense of cautious optimism. Thank you for listening. As Jack left the classroom, he felt a mix of emotions. Relief that Mr. Thompson seemed willing to change, but also a lingering worry for Anna. He hoped that this conversation would mark the beginning of a better experience for his daughter. That evening, when Anna came home, Jack sat her down and told her about the meeting. She listened intently, her eyes wide with hope and apprehension. So, he's going to be fair? She asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. That's what he said, Jack replied. And if things don't improve, we'll go back and talk to him again. But I think this is a good start. Anna smiled, a genuine smile that made Jack's heart lift. Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate it. Jack hugged her, feeling the weight of the day finally lift. We're in this together, Anna. Always. As they sat together, talking about their day, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had taken a step to support his daughter, to ensure she felt valued and understood. And in that moment, he knew they could face whatever challenges came their way. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when Jack woke up the next morning. He lay in bed for a few moments, the events of the previous day running through his mind. Anna's worried face, the tension in Mr. Thompson's classroom, the conversation that had left him feeling both hopeful and unsettled. He knew he couldn't leave things to chance. Today, he needed to make a plan. Jack got up quietly, not wanting to wake Anna. He moved through the house with purpose, making a pot of strong coffee and settling at the kitchen table with his laptop. He spent the next hour researching everything he could about school policies, the rights of students and parents, and any available information about Mr. Thompson's teaching record. He wanted to be fully prepared for whatever came next. As he read through various articles and documents, Jack's resolve solidified. He knew he had to follow through and ensure that Anna's school experience improved. It wasn't just about one conversation with her teacher, it was about creating a supportive environment where she could thrive. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled Jack from his thoughts. Anna appeared in the doorway, looking a little more rested than the previous night. "Morning, Dad," she said, her voice still a bit sleepy. "Morning, sweetheart," Jack replied, smiling. "How are you feeling today?" Anna shrugged. "A little better, I guess." "Did you really talk to Mr. Thompson yesterday?" "I did," Jack confirmed, watching her closely for her reaction. "He seemed to understand where we were coming from. He promised to be more mindful and fair." Anna sat down at the table, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Do you think it will really make a difference?" Jack nodded. "I think it's a start. And if things don't change, we'll keep talking to him until they do. You deserve to feel safe and respected at school, Anna." Anna managed a small smile. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." Jack reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We're in this together. Always." After breakfast, Jack walked Anna to the bus stop. As she boarded the bus, he felt a mix of pride and concern. He watched until the bus disappeared down the street, then turned and headed back home, his mind already on the next steps. Jack spent the morning making phone calls, speaking with other parents and gathering their perspectives on Mr. Thompson. He discovered that Anna wasn't the only student who had issues with the teacher. Several parents mentioned similar concerns, and this only strengthened Jack's resolve. He knew he needed to address this not just for Anna, but for all the students in Mr. Thompson's class. Around midday, Jack decided to visit the school again. This time, he made an appointment with the principal, Mrs. Parker. He wanted to ensure that she was aware of the situation and to seek her support in resolving it. The school was quieter now, with most students in their classrooms. Jack walked through the halls, feeling a sense of determination. He reached the principal's office and was greeted by Mrs. Parker's secretary. "Mr. Harrison, please have a seat." "Mrs. Parker will see you shortly," she said, gesturing to a chair. Jack nodded and sat down, his mind racing with thoughts of what he needed to say. After a few minutes, the door to the principal's office opened, and Mrs. Parker stepped out, a warm smile on her face. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for coming in." "Please, come on in," she said, holding the door open for him. Jack stood up and followed her into the office. Mrs. Parker gestured for him to sit in one of the chairs in front of her desk. She sat behind the desk, crossing her hands and looking at him expectantly. "What can I do for you today?" she asked. Jack took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Thanks for seeing me on such short notice, Mrs. Parker. I wanted to talk to you about my daughter, Anna, and her experience in Mr. Thompson's class." Mrs. Parker's expression grew more serious. "Yes, I've heard some concerns. Please, tell me what's going on." Jack explained the issues Anna had been facing, how she felt singled out negatively and treated unfairly. He mentioned his conversation with Mr. Thompson and his intention to monitor the situation. Mrs. Parker listened attentively, nodding occasionally. When Jack finished, she leaned back in her chair, considering his words. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Harrison. It's important that all our students feel supported and treated fairly. I'll talk to Mr. Thompson to get his perspective as well. We take these matters very seriously." "Thank you, Mrs. Parker," Jack said, feeling relieved. "I don't want to cause trouble, but I want to make sure Anna and her classmates get the best education possible." Mrs. Parker nodded. "I understand. And I want you to know that we're committed to providing a positive learning environment for all our students. I'll look into this and get back to you." Jack stood up, extending his hand. "Thank you for your time. I appreciate it." Mrs. Parker shook his hand. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. We'll be in touch soon." As he left the office, Jack felt a mix of emotions. He was relieved that the principal was taking the situation seriously, but he knew this was just the beginning. There was still a lot of work to be done, and he was determined to see it through to the end. That evening, when Anna got home, Jack could see the nervous anticipation in her eyes. He smiled and motioned for her to sit with him in the living room. "How was school today?" he asked. Anna shrugged. It was okay. Mr. Thompson didn't say much to me. He seemed different though. Like he was trying to be nicer. Jack nodded. That's good to hear. I also talked to the principal today. She's going to look into things and make sure everything is handled properly. Anna's eyes widened. You talked to the principal? What did she say? She was very understanding and promised to follow up, Jack replied. I think we're making progress, Anna. It might take some time, but I believe things will get better. Anna smiled, a genuine smile that warmed Jack's heart. Thanks, Dad. I feel a lot better knowing you're on my side. Jack hugged her tightly. Always, sweetheart. Always. As they sat together, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He was taking action, standing up for his daughter, and ensuring she had the support she needed. It was a long road ahead, but he was ready for whatever came next. With Anna by his side, he knew they could face any challenge together. The next day, Jack awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. His conversation with Mrs. Parker had gone well, but he knew that true change would require more than just a single meeting. Today, he was determined to observe Mr. Thompson's class firsthand. Jack waited until Anna left for school before making his move. He didn't want her to worry or feel more anxious than she already did. After she boarded the bus, Jack quickly got ready and drove to the school, his mind focused on what he needed to do. He knew that showing up unannounced could be risky, but he felt it was necessary to get an unfiltered view of the classroom environment. When Jack arrived at the school, he checked in at the front desk, explaining his intention to observe Mr. Thompson's class. The receptionist hesitated, but, seeing the determination in Jack's eyes, called the principal to inform her of Jack's request. Mrs. Parker approved, recognizing Jack's commitment to his daughter's well-being. Jack made his way down the familiar halls, feeling the eyes of students and teachers on him as he walked. He reached Mr. Thompson's classroom and paused outside the door, taking a deep breath before knocking lightly. He heard the murmur of voices inside, followed by a moment of silence, and then the door opened. Mr. Thompson stood there, a look of mild surprise on his face. Mr. Harrison, isn't it? Anna's father? Yes, Jack replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. I'd like to observe your class today, if that's all right. Mr. Thompson hesitated, glancing back at his students who were now watching the exchange with keen interest. Of course. Come in, he said finally, stepping aside to let Jack enter. Jack walked into the classroom, feeling the curious stares of the students follow him. He scanned the room quickly, noting the orderly rows of desks and the various educational posters on the walls. Mr. Thompson directed him to a chair at the back of the room, and Jack settled in, his attention fully on the teacher. Mr. Thompson returned to the front of the class, resuming his lesson with a calm demeanor. All right, class, as we were discussing before our guest arrived, let's continue with our review of the Civil War. Jack watched intently as Mr. Thompson interacted with the students. He noticed that Mr. Thompson maintained a strict, almost stern approach, but there was a noticeable effort to be fair and inclusive in his questioning. The students seemed engaged, though there was a palpable undercurrent of tension in the room. As the lesson progressed, Jack paid close attention to Anna. She appeared focused, diligently taking notes and occasionally raising her hand to answer questions. When Mr. Thompson called on her, Jack held his breath, observing the interaction carefully. Anna, can you explain the significance of the Emancipation Proclamation? Mr. Thompson asked. Anna nodded, her voice steady as she replied. The Emancipation Proclamation was significant because it declared the freedom of all slaves in the Confederate States. It also changed the nature of the Civil War, making it not just about preserving the Union but also about ending slavery. Mr. Thompson nodded approvingly. That's correct. Good job, Anna. Jack exhaled, feeling a small sense of relief. It was clear that Mr. Thompson was making an effort to be more encouraging. However, Jack also noted the subtle tension in Anna's posture, the way she seemed almost braced for criticism. After the lesson ended, Mr. Thompson announced a short break and the students began to chat among themselves. Jack saw this as an opportunity to speak with some of the students. He approached a small group that included Anna, who looked up at him with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Hi, Dad," Anna said, smiling nervously. "Hey, sweetheart," Jack replied. "I hope you don't mind me being here." "No, it's fine," she said, glancing at her friends. Jack turned to the other students. "So, what do you all think of Mr. Thompson's class?" There was a brief, awkward silence before one of the boys, Sam, spoke up. "It's okay, I guess. He's pretty strict, though." Another student, Lily, nodded in agreement. "Yeah, he can be really tough. But he's been a bit nicer lately." "Maybe because of your dad," she added, looking at Anna. Anna blushed slightly but smiled. "Yeah, maybe." Jack nodded thoughtfully, absorbing their comments. It was clear that Mr. Thompson's approach had been challenging for many of the students, but there was also a glimmer of hope that things were improving. As the break ended, Jack returned to his seat, continuing to observe for the remainder of the class. Mr. Thompson's efforts to be more balanced in his interactions were evident, though there was still an underlying rigidity to his teaching style. When the class finally ended, Jack stood up, ready to speak with Mr. Thompson again. The students filed out, some glancing back at Jack with curious expressions. Mr. Thompson approached him, a cautious look on his face. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for coming today. I hope you found the class informative," Mr. Thompson said. "I did," Jack replied. "I appreciate the effort you're making to be fairer. It's noticeable." Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I'm trying, Mr. Harrison. I really am. It's not always easy, but I want what's best for my students." Jack looked at him, seeing the genuine struggle in the man's eyes. "I believe you, Mr. Thompson. And I want to support you in making this a positive experience for Anna and all the students. If there's anything more I can do to help, please let me know." Mr. Thompson seemed taken aback by Jack's offer. "Thank you. That means a lot. I'll keep that in mind." Jack extended his hand, and Mr. Thompson shook it firmly. "We're in this together," Jack said. "For the kids." "For the kids," Mr. Thompson echoed, a hint of a smile on his lips. As Jack left the classroom, he felt a renewed sense of hope. The path to change was never easy, but with open communication and a willingness to work together, he believed they could create a better environment for Anna and her classmates. He walked out of the school, the sun shining brightly overhead, feeling a sense of accomplishment and determination for the challenges ahead. Jack drove home from the school, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. His day observing Mr. Thompson's class had been enlightening, but it also left him with more questions. What were the deeper issues at play here? Why did Mr. Thompson feel the need to be so strict? Jack knew he needed to dig deeper to understand the full picture. That evening, as Jack sat in the living room, Anna joined him, her face reflecting a mix of curiosity and concern. "So, how did it go today, Dad?" she asked, sitting down next to him. Jack smiled at her, wanting to reassure her. "It went well, Anna. I watched your class, and I could see that Mr. Thompson is trying to be fairer. He seems to care a lot about his students." Anna looked relieved but still uncertain. "Do you really think things will change?" "I do," Jack said firmly. "But I also think there's more going on. I want to understand why Mr. Thompson is so strict and see if there's anything else we can do to help him and the other students." Anna nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I never really thought about why he acts the way he does. Maybe he has his own problems." "That's what I'm thinking," Jack replied. "And the best way to help is to understand the whole situation." The next day, Jack decided to reach out to Mr. Thompson directly. He sent him an email, thanking him for allowing him to observe the class and requesting a private meeting to discuss things further. To his surprise, Mr. Thompson responded promptly, agreeing to meet after school. When the time came, Jack arrived at the school and made his way to Mr. Thompson's classroom. The halls were quiet, the last of the students having left for the day. Jack knocked on the door and heard Mr. Thompson's voice inviting him in. "Mr. Harrison, please come in," Mr. Thompson said, standing up from his desk. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Thank you for agreeing to talk," Jack replied, taking a seat across from him. Mr. Thompson looked a bit weary, the strain of the day evident on his face. "I appreciate your patience and your willingness to understand what's happening." Jack nodded. "I want to help, Mr. Thompson. Not just for Anna's sake, but for all the students. I could see you're trying, and I want to support you in any way I can." Mr. Thompson sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's been a tough year, Mr. Harrison. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that most people don't see." Jack leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'd like to hear about it, if you're willing to share." Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, then began to speak. "Well, to start with, there's a lot of pressure from the administration to meet certain standards. We're constantly being evaluated based on test scores and performance metrics. It's stressful, to say the least." Jack nodded, understanding the challenges teachers faced. "That sounds incredibly tough. It's like you're always under a microscope." "Exactly," Mr. Thompson said, a note of frustration in his voice. "And then there are personal challenges. My wife has been ill for the past few months, and it's been hard to balance everything." Jack's expression softened with empathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. That must be incredibly difficult for you." Mr. Thompson nodded, his eyes showing a hint of the vulnerability he usually kept hidden. "It's been a struggle. I try not to let it affect my work, but sometimes it's hard to keep it all separate." Jack took a deep breath, feeling a new level of understanding for Mr. Thompson's situation. "I appreciate you sharing that with me. It helps to see the bigger picture." Mr. Thompson looked at him, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I'm not trying to be unfair, Mr. Harrison. I just want to do the best I can for my students. But I realize now that my methods might not always be the best approach." Jack nodded. "We all make mistakes, but the important thing is that you're willing to change. Maybe we can come up with some strategies together to make the classroom a better place for everyone." Mr. Thompson smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Harrison. Any support would be welcome." They spent the next hour discussing various ideas and strategies. Jack suggested incorporating more positive reinforcement and providing opportunities for students to express their concerns and suggestions. Mr. Thompson agreed to try these methods, feeling hopeful that they could make a difference. As their meeting came to an end, Jack stood up, extending his hand. "Thank you for being open with me, Mr. Thompson. I believe we can make this work." Mr. Thompson shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Your support means a lot." When Jack returned home, he felt a sense of accomplishment. He had not only gained a deeper understanding of Mr. Thompson's struggles but also formed a plan to improve the classroom environment. He knew it wouldn't be an overnight change, but he felt confident that they were on the right path. That evening, he shared the details of his meeting with Anna, who listened with rapt attention. "Wow, Dad. I didn't know Mr. Thompson was going through so much. It's easy to forget that teachers have their own lives and struggles," Jack said gently. "But knowing this, we can work together to make things better." Anna nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll try to be more understanding too. And I'll do my best to help in any way I can." Jack smiled, feeling proud of his daughter's empathy and willingness to help. "We're in this together, Anna. Always." As they sat together, discussing their plans and hopes for the future, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be challenging, but with open communication and mutual support, he believed they could create a better environment for everyone involved. And in that moment, he knew they were stronger together, ready to face whatever came their way. The next few weeks brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere at school. Jack's discussions with Mr. Thompson and the principal had set a series of changes in motion. Anna felt the difference almost immediately. Mr. Thompson was making a genuine effort to be more encouraging, incorporating positive reinforcement and fostering a more inclusive classroom environment. The tension that had once filled the room began to dissipate, replaced by a more collaborative and supportive atmosphere. One afternoon, as Jack was finishing up work at home, his phone buzzed with a message from Anna. "Dad, can you come to the school? We're having a class meeting, and Mr. Thompson invited parents. He says it's important." Jack's heart swelled with pride and curiosity. He quickly grabbed his keys and headed to the school, eager to see what this meeting was about. When he arrived, he found the classroom filled with students and a few other parents, all seated in a circle. Mr. Thompson stood at the center, looking more relaxed and approachable than Jack had ever seen him. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Thompson began, his voice warm and inviting. "Today, I wanted to have an open discussion about how we can continue to improve our classroom environment. Your input is invaluable, and I want to ensure that everyone feels heard and supported." Jack took a seat next to Anna, who smiled up at him. He noticed a new lightness in her demeanor, a confidence that hadn't been there before. As the meeting progressed, students and parents shared their thoughts and suggestions. The dialogue was open and respectful, with Mr. Thompson actively listening and engaging with each comment. One student, Lily, raised her hand. "I think it would be great if we could have more group projects. It helps us learn to work together and support each other." Mr. Thompson nodded. "That's a fantastic idea, Lily. We can definitely incorporate more group projects. How about we start with a collaborative history project next week?" The students murmured excitedly, and Jack felt a sense of optimism growing within him. This was exactly the kind of environment he had hoped for, a place where students felt valued and involved in their learning process. After the meeting, Mr. Thompson approached Jack and Anna. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrison. And thank you, Anna, for your contributions. I've seen such a positive change in you these past few weeks." Anna beamed. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It means a lot to hear that." Jack smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "I appreciate everything you're doing, Mr. Thompson. It's made a world of difference for Anna and, I'm sure, for the other students as well." Mr. Thompson looked genuinely grateful. "We're all learning and growing together. It's been a challenging journey, but I'm glad we're making progress." As Jack and Anna left the school that day, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the campus. They walked in comfortable silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. When they arrived home, they found a message on the answering machine. It was from Mrs. Parker, the principal, inviting Jack to a meeting with the school board to discuss the positive changes happening in Mr. Thompson's classroom and how they could be implemented school-wide. Jack listened to the message with a sense of accomplishment. He had started this journey to help his daughter, but it had grown into something much bigger, a movement toward creating a better learning environment for all students. The following week, Jack attended the school board meeting, where he spoke passionately about the changes he had witnessed. He shared his journey, from Anna's initial complaints to the collaborative efforts with Mr. Thompson and the positive impact it had on the students. The board members listened intently, asking questions and taking notes. After Jack finished his presentation, Mrs. Parker stood up. "Mr. Harrison, your dedication and commitment to improving our school environment are truly inspiring. We're committed to supporting these initiatives and expanding them throughout the school." The room erupted in applause, and Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than he had ever hoped for. As he left the meeting, he couldn't wait to share the news with Anna and Mr. Thompson. Back at home, Anna was eagerly waiting for him. "How did it go, Dad?" Jack grinned, sweeping her into a hug. "It went great, Anna. The school board is on board with expanding the changes we've made in your classroom to the entire school. This is just the beginning." Anna's eyes sparkled with excitement. "That's amazing, Dad. I'm so proud of you." Jack smiled, feeling tears of pride and happiness welling up. I'm proud of you too, Anna. You were brave enough to speak up, and because of that, we've made a difference." In the days that followed, the changes began to take root throughout the school. Teachers started adopting more inclusive and supportive teaching methods, fostering a more positive and collaborative environment. Students felt more engaged and motivated, knowing that their voices mattered. Mr. Thompson continued to thrive, finding a balance between maintaining high standards and being more empathetic toward his students. His classroom became a model for others, showcasing the power of open communication and mutual respect. One afternoon, as Jack was picking up Anna from school, she ran up to him with a bright smile. "Dad, guess what? Mr. Thompson nominated me for the Student Leadership Program. He said I've shown great potential and leadership skills." Jack's heart swelled with pride. "That's wonderful, Anna. You deserve it." As they walked to the car, Jack reflected on how far they had come. What had started as a simple complaint had blossomed into a transformative journey, not just for Anna, but for the entire school community. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for everyone who had been part of this journey: Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Parker, the school board, and most importantly, Anna. Jack and Anna drove home, the sun setting behind them, casting a warm glow over the horizon. It was a new beginning, a brighter future filled with endless possibilities. And as they pulled into the driveway, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger and more united than ever. In that moment, Jack realized that true change starts with a single step, a single voice willing to speak up. And with each step forward, they were creating a better world, one classroom at a time.